Hey, shush, listen up. I want to say something. People, Earth, I need to say something. Listen to me. I hope every one of you behind the screens or in this arena can feel this level of happiness just one time in your life.
Israel Adesanya, once the middleweight king, dominated the UFC with sheer brilliance. His rise to the top was swift, and his reign felt unshakable. With 2 title defenses under his belt and whispers of him becoming a double champion and a legend of the sport, Adesanya seemed untouchable. Yet even the most formidable empires eventually faced their downfall, and it was a few harsh defeats that shattered Izzy's hopes of immortality. In his pursuit of greatness, the middleweight champion of the world would soon find himself frozen, like Elsa, by men far more vicious than he could have ever imagined. Adesanya's first wake-up call came at UFC 259. He entered the octagon brimming with confidence, having already dispatched Robert Whittaker to capture the title and defending it against formidable foes like Yoel Romero and Paulo Costa. His next challenge? The light heavyweight champion, Jan Blachowicz. A chance to cement his legacy as a dual champion. Adesanya was oozing self-assurance, convinced that his agility and sharp striking would overcome Blachowicz's physicality. But as the cage door closed, a cold dose of reality hit hard. Blachowicz used his size and grappling skills to control Izzy, out-muscling him at every turn. The decision was clear, a lopsided victory for the Polish powerhouse, leaving Izzy and his fans stunned, questioning the future of his reign. Though the loss stung, Adesanya's dominance at middleweight didn't falter. He returned to form, dispatching top contenders like Marvin Vettori, Robert Whittaker, and Jared Cannonier with ease. But in the shadows, a new threat was rising: Alex Pereira. Their history was already legendary in kickboxing, where Pereira had twice defeated Adesanya, including one crushing knockout that still haunted Izzy's memory. When Pereira made his UFC debut, it didn't take long for the Brazilian to catch the UFC's eye. His 2 victories over Adesanya, making him an inevitable challenger. But Adesanya, ever the confident champion, believed that Pereira hadn't earned his shot. He boldly declared that he would leave Pereira frozen like Elsa, a promise that would come back to haunt him. The fight at UFC 281 began with promise. Adesanya looked in control, wobbling Pereira in the first round with a vicious combination. But Pereira, as always, was a dangerous man to count out. He weathered the storm and slowly began to take over, landing powerful strikes and forcing Adesanya to resort to wrestling. By the 5th round, Adesanya was ahead on the scorecards, just moments away from retaining his title. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Pereira's left hook landed clean, dropping the champion to the canvas. Izzy was knocked out cold, his dreams of continuing his reign dashed in the blink of an eye. 6 months later, the rivalry reached its boiling point. Adesanya, with everything to prove, faced Pereira again at UFC 287. This time, the script was flipped. Adesanya silenced his critics with a stunning knockout, reclaiming the middleweight title and sending a message to Pereira. But just as the dust settled, another storm was brewing. Pereira, seeking redemption, jumped to the light heavyweight division, leaving the middleweight throne unguarded. Adesanya's thoughts turned to the next challenger, South Africa's Dricus du Plessis, a man who had stirred the pot by disrespecting African champions like Adesanya, Kamaru Usman, and Francis Ngannou. Adesanya, already brimming with anger, was eager to face du Plessis at UFC 293. But du Plessis, to the champion's frustration, declined the fight, wanting more time to prepare. With du Plessis out of the picture, another new contender emerged, Sean Strickland. Strickland's brash personality and controversial antics made him an unlikely hero, but he entered the octagon against Adesanya with one goal in mind: to dethrone the champion. The odds were stacked against him, but Strickland shocked the world by dropping Adesanya in the first round. Though Izzy weathered the storm, he couldn't recover. Strickland capitalized on the momentum, cruising to a dominant decision victory that left fans in disbelief. The once unshakable champion had been taken down, his reign slipping through his fingers in a moment of shocking defeat. Adesanya, bruised both physically and emotionally, decided to step away and recalibrate. During his hiatus, the middleweight division saw a new champion crowned as Duplessis defeated Strickland in a closely contested fight. It seemed like the perfect time for Adesanya to make his return and reclaim what he had lost. The UFC quickly booked a showdown between the two at UFC 305, and the rivalry was on. But Duplessis, ever the instigator, pushed Adesanya to his breaking point with words that seemed to cut deeper than any punch. Adesanya, visibly emotional, promised to settle the score inside the cage, vowing to show Duplessis exactly who was the true champion of Africa. The fight at UFC 305 was one for the ages. A brutal back-and-forth war where both fighters had their moments of glory, but in the end, it was Duplessis who would emerge victorious. Late in the fourth round, he rocked Adesanya with a devastating blow before locking in a choke that forced the former champion to tap out. Izzy's fall from grace seemed complete. His once promising career had now been plagued by a series of setbacks and crushing defeats. But Adesanya's journey wasn't over yet. In his next fight, he faced the rising star Nasruddin Imavov, who was eager to make a name for himself by defeating the former champion. Imavov's striking was sharp, and his determination was evident. As the cage door closed at UFC Saudi Arabia, it seemed like the old Adesanya had returned, using his distance and low kicks to control the fight. But then, in the second round, Imavov unleashed a right hand that sent the former champ crashing to the mat. The ground and pound followed, and Imavov earned the biggest victory of his career, leaving Adesanya's future in jeopardy. So what now for the last style bender? Has time caught up to him? Or is this just a rough patch in a career that's seen its share of highs and lows? Can he rise from the ashes like a phoenix and reclaim his place at the top? One thing is for certain, the journey of Israel Adesanya is far from over. The questions remain. Will he find redemption, or has the king fallen for good? Born into a world filled with uncertainty, Tony's biological father was never part of the picture. Raised by his stepfather, a Scottish-American named Armand Ferguson, Tony grew up on a farm in Michigan. His life wasn't easy. It was filled with hard labor and isolation. Extreme bullying took its toll, but sports became his refuge. Boxing, inspired by legends like Fernando Vargas and Oscar de la Hoya, gave him purpose. He excelled in wrestling and football, dreaming of greatness, but fate had other plans. He dropped out of college and started bartending, drifting away from his dreams. Then one night, everything changed. While working behind the bar, a man noticed Tony's cauliflower ear and struck up a conversation about his wrestling background. That man was a trainer at a local MMA gym, and he invited Tony to train. It was a turning point in Tony's life. Despite being rejected multiple times from the Ultimate Fighter reality show, Tony never gave up. He applied again and again, determined to prove that he belonged in the UFC. Finally, in 2010, he got his shot, chosen by Brock Lesnar for season 13 of the show. Tony was ready to make his mark, but even as his career took off, Tony's demons began to emerge. Alcohol and anger issues started to take their toll, creating problems for him both in and outside the cage. His behavior, especially when intoxicated, was aggressive and confrontational. In 2015, a highly anticipated fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov fell through when Khabib was forced to withdraw due to an injury. Tony's fate was tied to Khabib's in a way that was beyond his control. Time passed and another opportunity arose, but fate continued to mock Tony. Khabib's injury led to a 2-year hiatus, and by the time they were set to meet again in 2016, Tony had to pull out due to his own health issues. The fight that fans had been clamoring for seemed doomed, but it wasn't just Khabib that stood in Tony's way. He made a quick return to the UFC, fighting on the same card as Khabib and McGregor. But this time, it wasn't Khabib who stood in his way. It was Justin Gaethje. Despite agreeing to fight Gaethje and saving the card, Tony's fall from grace began. The fight was brutal. Tony absorbed over 100 punches, his once unstoppable spirit breaking under the weight of Gaethje's onslaught. The referee had no choice but to stop the fight. For Tony, this was the moment when everything changed. The loss to Gaethje marked the beginning of a new chapter in Tony's career, one defined by decline. Matchups against Charles Oliveira and Beneil Dariush proved unfavorable, and his knockout loss to Michael Chandler was the final blow. Tony's losing streak grew, and he became a shadow of the fighter he once was. Fans who once adored him as the boogeyman now watched in silence as he struggled to maintain his relevance in a sport that had moved on. His battles with aging and physical decline became undeniable, and with each loss, his legacy seemed to fade further. But even as his career spiraled, Tony Ferguson remained a beloved figure in the UFC. Despite the tragedies, the mental health struggles, and the physical setbacks, his legacy was etched in the hearts of fans. He might never have achieved the undisputed championship or faced Khabib in the octagon, but Tony Ferguson was a fighter who gave everything. His unorthodox style, his heart, and his dedication to the sport will never be forgotten. The fall of El Kuki was painful, but it will never erase the brilliance he once brought to the cage. Paulo Costa once embodied the very essence of fear in the UFC. His rise was rapid, and his persona was larger than life. He wasn't just a fighter, he was chaos incarnate. With a physique carved from granite and fists that could shatter opponents in an instant, Costa quickly became a sensation in the sport. Undefeated with 13 wins, 11 by knockout, he was feared, respected, and above all, unstoppable. But the myth of the Brazilian wrecking ball was destined to crumble, and the fall would be just as dramatic as his rise. This is the story of Paulo Costa, a man who went from the UFC's brightest star to one of its most perplexing enigmas. Born in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, Costa didn't grow up with a silver spoon in his mouth. His family struggled to make ends meet. His father worked odd jobs while his mother worked tirelessly to support them. Costa wasn't born into a world of martial arts. Instead, his older brother introduced him to jiu-jitsu at 17. What followed was a meteoric rise built on raw power and an unrelenting drive to succeed. Costa didn't just win, he dismantled his opponents. His fighting style wasn't just about power, it was about fear. He had an aura of invincibility, and his opponents felt it before the fight even began. His social media presence amplified this persona, memes, training videos, and playful jabs at his rivals. Costa was a myth in the making. He wasn't just a fighter, he was an icon, a symbol of power and dominance in the UFC. But that aura of invincibility would soon be shattered, and his first true test came against Yoel Romero. The battle with Yoel Romero in 2020 was a turning point in Costa's career. Romero was a beast, a force of nature, and this fight tested Costa like never before. The war with Romero proved Costa could go toe-to-toe with one of the most dangerous men in the sport and still come out on top. It was a hard-fought victory, but it set the stage for the biggest fight of his career, a showdown with Israel Adesanya at UFC 253. Both men were undefeated, both had something to prove, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. But when they stepped into the octagon, the myth of Paulo Costa crumbled. Adesanya wasn't just better than Costa, he was on another level. The fight was a disaster for Costa. His usual explosive style failed him. Adesanya picked him apart with ease, using his speed and precision to batter Costa with leg kicks, jabs, and counterstrikes. Costa looked lost, sluggish, and outclassed. In just 2 rounds, Adesanya had dismantled him, leaving Costa crumpled on the canvas. The public humiliation wasn't just a loss, it was a wake-up call. Costa wasn't just defeated physically, his confidence, his myth was shattered. In the aftermath of the fight, Costa offered a strange explanation. He claimed he drank an entire bottle of wine the night before the fight to help him sleep. Fans were baffled. Was it a joke, an excuse, or the truth? The fighter who had once been unstoppable now sounded like a parody of himself. Sympathy quickly turned to mockery. Costa's image as a fearsome middleweight powerhouse had been replaced with the image of a meme. His antics on social media only fueled the chaos as he leaned into the absurdity of it all. The fighter who had once commanded respect now seemed to be chasing it in all the wrong ways. When Costa returned to the octagon against Marvin Vettori, things took another strange turn. Costa showed up 25 pounds overweight, a decision that only added to his growing reputation for unpredictability. The fight was a mess from the start, and despite showing flashes of his old power, Costa was outworked by Vettori. The fight exposed the cracks in Costa's game. He had the power, but his technique, his defense, and his focus were all lacking. He had gone from title contender to unreliable and frustrating. The myth had truly fallen apart. Instead of focusing on redemption, Costa embraced the chaos. He made jokes about secret juice and called himself the Juice God. He mocked drug testing agencies and turned his fight career into a bizarre spectacle. His actions felt less like a comeback and more like a distraction from the reality that his career was in freefall. In 2022, Costa faced Luke Rockhold. The fight was ugly, bloody, and brutal, but Costa managed to pull off a win. It was a glimmer of the old Costa, the fighter who could still bring the pain when needed. But that victory was fleeting. Costa pulled out of subsequent fights with Robert Whittaker and Ikram Aliskerov, citing a contract dispute. He also no-showed UFC 291, further cementing his reputation as an unreliable fighter. Then came the announcement of a showdown with Khamzat Chimaev at UFC 294, but again, Costa withdrew due to an elbow infection. Fans were left wondering if Costa would ever be the fighter he once was. So where does this leave us? Paulo Costa is still in his early 30s, still capable of incredible destruction in the octagon. But the myth, the legend, is gone. What remains is a fighter with incredible power, but unpredictable behavior, a former monster reduced to a shell of his former self. And yet, in the midst of all the chaos, there's still a flicker of hope. If Costa can rediscover his focus, if he can reignite the fire that once burned so brightly, he may still have one last chance to prove he's more than just a meme. But for now, the question remains, is the best of Paulo Costa still to come, or has the last chapter already been written?